Her laugh is a laugh of disbelief, saying, I don't believe it. Enough's enough. I've heard enough. I don't believe it can happen. I'm old. I'm too old to have a child. My husband is too old to have a child, and yet you're telling me in 9 months I'm going to have a baby. I don't believe it. After all the heartache, after all the years of feeling broken and worthless, now how is it possible that she could experience this? Her reaction prompts a powerful question. Is anything too hard for God? Anything. Go ahead, Jesus says there. Write down all of the things. Make a list of all of the things that you think are impossible for God. That question is not just important for Sarah to answer thousands of years ago. That question is important for you and I to answer today. So go ahead. Take out a piece of paper this morning and make the list of things that are impossible for God. Make a list of things this morning that He can't do. Go ahead. Would you be bold enough to write something down on that list? Because the Bible reminds us here in this text that we can rely on God to do the impossible. But the question for us this morning is, do we? Or maybe better put, why don't we? Why don't we ask God to do the impossible? Why sometimes do we function like there are some things that are just too hard for God to do? Maybe we need to be reminded not only of this text, but what Paul wrote in Ephesians chapter 3, verse 20. When speaking of God, he says, now to Him who is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all we ask or think. Do you believe that God can still do that? Do you believe that God still functions exceedingly and abundantly over even what you ask? If so, do your prayers reflect that? Do you pray for God to do the impossible? Do you pray for God to do exceedingly and abundantly more than you can comprehend? Do your actions reflect that? Does your lifestyle reflect that? Do your choices reflect that? Do we really believe that God can do anything? It's not always a belief that He will, but it's a belief that He can. It's a trust that He can if it's His will. Sarah struggled here in our text to believe that. You remember in earlier chapters that Abraham struggled to believe that. If you're honest with yourself this morning, you may struggle to believe that God can really do exceedingly and abundantly. Can He really do what people say is impossible? Can He really still work in ways that can only be explained by the hand of God? Do you really believe that? This text calls us to trust God, that He can do the impossible, that God is limitless. In fact, He calls us to trust that He can make the impossible possible. What is it in your life? What's the impossible in your life? Is it a health issue that's just nagging and won't go away and doctors can't seem to give an answer for? Doctors can't seem to have any help. Doctors can't seem to give you any hope. It's impossible, they say. Is it a financial situation where your financial predicament is more than you can bear and you think there's no way this is impossible? Maybe it's your children or grandchildren that have wandered away from the Lord, that have wandered away from a relationship with you, and there's been a break in a relationship with a child or a grandchild, and you think there's no way they'd ever come back and talk to me again. It's impossible. Maybe it's your marriage this morning. Maybe your marriage is struggling, falling apart, and you think it's beyond hope. There's no way it can be healed. This text is a reminder that God alone can make the impossible possible. Will you trust Him